Coming up, a Sad Styles production.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mikey Aaronworth, signing on to the sign-off of Frameworth Podcast for yet another week. It's the podcast where we talk about all the stories you didn't know you wished you knew about the world of sports and sports marketing. I am joined in studio by Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, looking a little bit healthier than our last recording.
Well, just came back from the Crosbys in Florida, so yeah.
Celebrating Goal 500, you're finally recovering. We had Chris Broadhurst who gave you a couple suggestions of exercises you could do to alleviate the headaches, and you're looking much better.
I'm fine now, yeah.
Fine, better now. Good. Well, thanks again for joining us. As we always like to do on this podcast is give a little bit of a shout out to our listeners. Those of you who are taking to iTunes and Spotify to leave us ratings and reviews, that goes a very, very long way. And so we like to give you a little bit of a shout out and a treat and a potential for a giveaway. This one related to this week's guest, which we'll get into in a moment. I want to read this review. From Apple Podcasts, 5 stars, Adam H91. The podcast is amazing. I look forward to the content each week and think any hockey fan and collector would enjoy listening. Amazing to see the best in the hockey collectible business do such a great podcast. Thank you so much. We would like to think we are among the best as well, and so are our guests, and so is my co-host here, Brian Aaronworth. Yeah. Remember, just starting off, you were so nervous to be in front of the microphone, shy.
Well, that's because I thought I had to do something. I just listen to you now.
Well, welcome to the 33 years of my life growing up. You learned at an early age. You just let me talk, and eventually I'll get tired. Still waiting on the getting tired thing, but enough of this back and forth. I'd love to introduce our guest because we have a ton of questions to get into there. Today on the podcast, we're joined by one of the most prolific goal scorers in NHL history, a man who helped redefine the role of power forward and now serves as an outspoken pillar of the hockey community. In his playing days, he captained the Toronto Maple Leafs for 4 seasons and continues to hold the season goal scoring record for the franchise at 54. You can read all about his life in Catch 22, My Battles in Hockey and Life, or listen to him on the Squid and the Ultimate Leafs Fan podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Vaive. Rick, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Great
always
to
nice.
Be here.
Always nice to have you sitting across the room. A guy, as I mentioned, the Squid and the Ultimate Leaf Fan. For those of you who are listening and like the sound of your voice and all the stories you're telling, you can listen. It's a weekly podcast. It's out there. Search on your favorite podcast
from a previous
platform.
guest,
Mike Wilson.
The
Ultimate Leafs Fan.
It with Rick. And by the way, that's what we're going to give away this week to your...
Right, to Adam H91. I forgot to mention, we're going to be giving away a signed Rick Vaive 8x10. Rick was at Frameworth, agreed to do a signing with us, and we thought, hey, why not come on board and do a little bit of the podcast as well? So Adam H, reach out to us, signoffpod@frameworth.com with your shipping information. We'll get that sent out to you right away. Now, I want to get into this. First of all, before we get into in-depth in your story, Rick, I want to touch on your nicknames a little bit. Squid is one of them that could mean 1,000 different things. Let's start off with Squid because you have a few nicknames. 2 of them I need answers on. Let's start with Squid. What's the story behind that?
Well, it started out as Spud when I went to Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
In the WHA, I was 19 with Craig Hartsburg, Ramage, and Brigham, and there was a couple other guys. John Brophy was my coach.
Sure.
So we're doing power play one day in practice at one end, and everybody's screwing around at the other end, just shooting and doing things. And it was our unit's turn to come down and do the power play. Mm-hmm. Broph's standing at the blue line, and he's screaming out as loud as he possibly could, "Squid! Squid!" And Hartsburg said, "Who are you calling?" He said, "Vaive." He said, "Oh, you mean Spud?" And he said, "Squid, Spud, I don't give an F what you call him. Just get him down here."
And then, I never knew that story, and I should have.
Yeah, and so anyway, then I go to Vancouver the next year, and
right.
Nobody calls me Squid.
Right.
Everybody just calls me Rick or RV or whatever. I get traded to Toronto. We're playing Minnesota. In the warm-up, I'm stretching by the red line, and Hartsburg comes up, and he says, "Hey, Squid, how you doing?" And Dave Burrows is standing right beside me. And he goes, "Squid?" He looks, and then that was it. It was Squid. From then on, it still is today. All the guys I played with call me Squid.
I would have assumed it's something like, well, you're draped over the opposition.
No.
It's like you got 8 arms out there. I was like, well, that's a great nickname. Way to go. But you know what? That's just as good as any other. From Spud to Squid.
Well, wait. I'm I'm wondering how Spud came about.
Okay, how about that?
Well, coming from PEI.
Oh, okay. There you go. Okay,
So,
sorry.
and of course, Brof was from Mannequin-ish. He should have realized that.
Yeah.
But there was a guy that played in the WHA from Cape Breton, Morrison, I think his name was, a defenseman whose nickname was Squid.
Right.
So I don't know, Brof must have coached him sometime. And
So he's thinking.
got him mixed up, and all of a sudden, but that's how it came about, and it still
That's
is today.
crazy.
And it's still the other nickname I love, and I think I know the story behind it, but I think our listeners would appreciate it as well. Is the $1 Million Man in Buffalo? You were given that nickname. You want to tell the listeners how you got that one?
Well, that was kind of funny because it was we practiced at the old building, Saberland, and when I got traded there, they sent a guy to drive my car there. And of course, I didn't see my family. I got traded there the day after Christmas.
Whoa.
Oh.
And my in-laws were in town, and we had a 2-year-old, and my wife was pregnant. I didn't see them till February 4th
Oh, geez.
during our All-Star break, which really wasn't a break. It was 2 days, not like today.
Right.
But so anyway, I had they sent someone to bring my car down to Buffalo. And of course, I couldn't afford it when I played in Toronto because it was too expensive in Canada. And with the taxes, I wasn't making enough money. But
Right.
I wanted a 420 SEL Mercedes.
Okay.
So I get to Chicago. I go to a dealership in the off season. I got jeans on and a T-shirt. I think I was 27 years old, 26, 27. Nobody came and helped me. So I left, went to another dealership, same thing. So 2 weeks later, I go back to the first dealership, and there's a young guy, probably about 30 or 31.
Yeah.
And he comes right over and he says, "Can I help you, sir?" And I said, "Yeah, I want that car out there, that black one." And he said, "You want to lease it?" I said, No, I want to buy it. Because I was making a lot more
Sure.
money in Chicago with
Yeah.
the taxes. And he said, "Well, it's $62,000 or 63, I think." And I said, "Yeah, it is now, but once we sit down and talk, it won't be." So I got him down to 59, and he said, "So you want to lease it or whatever?" And I said, No. I said, "I'm going to write you a check." So I wrote him out a check. So I went by they washed it and everything, and I'm driving by the front, and all the old guys that wouldn't come near me the first time are at the window, and I'm riding by and
Giving him the finger.
giving them the bird. And so anyway, that car comes to Buffalo. So it's parked at Saberland, and the guys are walking out, and they're going, "Oh, one of our doctors must be here or something." And of course, I always dressed nice too. I always had nice suits and everything.
Unless you're going to the dealership.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, someone said, "Whose car is that?" And then when I came out, I got in the car. And that's where that came from.
Oh,
They
wow.
said,
$1 Million Man.
$1 Million Man.
Here's a question. Hockey players, most sports athletes are notorious for creating nicknames. Like nobody seems to be called by their actual name.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
It's a good question.
You know what? That is a good question. And I really don't know, other than the fact that I think hockey players just
Part of the camaraderie?
it's part of the, yeah. And you, like, I don't know. It just seems weird for me. Like when I was playing with Billy Derlego to call him Billy,
Right.
or John Anderson to call him John.
Right.
It just is boring.
Right. Right.
Like when you're with them all the time and every day, it kind of gets boring and monotonous. So you come up with a nickname, something that's funny, like Johnny Rotten, because he had the burger joints, and
right.
so they called him Johnny Rottenberger, and it got shortened to Johnny Rotten. And it's just I think it was just boring to call people by their first names.
Yeah. You know what? I find that, if we're talking to some of the players, like Sidney was talking the other day, and he was talking about dog, and I'm trying to figure out who is that? Like
Colby Armstrong?
That's what I thought.
Arm dog?
No, yeah, that's what I thought. And so I started talking about, because I know Colby, and he was at the game for the 500 goal, and we were talking a little bit, and texted me. And so I referred to him. Sidney must have thought I was nuts, because he never replied when I mentioned something about referring to Colby.
Right.
And it turns out it's McKinnon. So I don't know why or how or whatever, but that's his own. Anyways, it's hard sometimes to figure out who they're referring to because you got to be up not only on their name, but their nickname, which is what they use more frequently.
The nickname of the nickname.
Right.
It feels like it changes every season. You've got a new one going. Like,
I mean, the thing is too, is a lot of them, it comes from their name. It's, you know, like Billy was Billy V.
Right.
Nobody called him Billy. It was just Billy V.
Right.
You know, or it could be
Smitty
like
or
Millsy or Smitty or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that happens, but it's the ones that are unique that are the best.
Yeah.
I mean, when something happens and then all of a sudden they get that nickname and it's
sometimes wild. They don't like it when it sticks too.
Yeah, you can't escape it too. That's like the whole idea of you being called Squid in front of like your new crew, and you're like, no, don't say that. I didn't want to be Squid in the first place.
So actually, just not to jump in here, but the first time I was down in Atlanta for the All-Star game, and Pat Kane and Jonathan Toews were clients of ours.
Oh,
so we're waiting outside the bar. And they said they'd get us in. Pat Brisson was there. It was big. All the guys from CAA were there. And so as a joke, they let me stand outside for at least 10 minutes with Brian Duchek, our president, or a VP. And so we're waiting. Finally, they text down and they let us in, and they come up and they were laughing their heads off. And Kaner says, "Hey, here comes Perme." Okay. Now we had a few drinks that night. So I'm sitting there going, oh, a nickname, Perme, because I have curly hair.
Right.
So now, so they all start joking about Perme. Well, Brian, who had a few more cocktails than I, thought they were disrespecting me. And which they probably were, he ends up like getting really angry. And I have to hold him back. They didn't know he was getting angry, but I looked at him and he was furious. He was ready to kind of go. And I'm going, are you kidding me? Like, these are our top clients. They can say whatever. They can tell me I'm an asshole. I don't care. We're making money off these guys. Shut up.
Oh my God.
And to this day, whenever I go to see them, JT will say, "Hey, Perme, how you doing?" And it's a
rite of passage.
It's
though.
an endearment.
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. We're good buddies now. So, anyways,
I think when you're that close with people and you come up with a nickname, it's not disrespect to the person.
No.
It's I think it's love, really. I mean, that you love that person as a person. So you give them a nice nickname.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's like, your closest friends, you'll rib them, you'll make fun of them, but it's like, it's just a way to endear yourselves to one another. And I think that culture among hockey players is so important too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's how a lot of the nicknames come out. It's like, you're at a bar one night and all of a sudden something happens and you say something, call somebody something, and then it just sticks.
That's it.
I think it's great.
It's great. I mean, it's scary because who knows, the one night you make a mistake and you're known for that forever. I mean, Squid could have meant so many terrible things, like a bad trip to the aquarium and you did something you regret and now you're Squid all of a sudden. You never know. I like your story a little bit better. I wanted, because you mentioned the WHA a little bit. And, I think that you're a person who's personality kind of exemplifies the style of play you've had on the ice. You stand up for what you believe in. You're very outspoken, and I think you brought a lot of that kind of play, the grit to the style of hockey as well. And I want to sort of paint that picture, especially as we get into talking about your book and what you're doing nowadays. But before then, I do want to talk kind of about the path that got you there. And one of those, as I mentioned, was the WHA, and that's an era that fascinates me, especially when you were playing there. Right at around the time you had one season in the WHA before it merged with the NHL, you signed an underage contract a couple years after John Tonelli and his contract dispute, which he was working on with Gus Badali, who was a previous guest on the podcast. And this is when the WHA kind of became known for signing younger players and treating them with the respect that they deserved, where the NHL was kind of trying to sign them for lesser contracts and keep them underpaid. Were you familiar with the contracts disputes that went on with guys like John Tonelli prior to signing with the WHA? And did that involve why you decided to sign with them in the first place?
No, I didn't have any... I never heard anything about any disputes or anything like that. I just knew, how many guys had gone to Birmingham. I mean, Langway, Napier, Linsman. I mean, there's other guys too. Davey Gorman, There's a ton of guys that went there. The WHA was really good for hockey players.
Oh, yeah.
It allowed the younger guys that were under 20 to play pro hockey and make decent money. I mean, we didn't get a whole lot of money when we went there. I think I had 20 to sign and 30 salary. But it was a hell of a lot more than I was making in junior.
Sure.
I was making $19 a week in junior.
Yeah.
So, but no, it was great. I mean, we got treated very, very well by our owner. He was, I can't even remember his name right now. From Toronto here. What's his name?
Bassett.
That's it. And like, he was like, when he came down, he was like Hugh Hefner.
Yeah.
The sweater tied around the neck and everything. And, the sailboats and all that kind of stuff. And, because we loved him. I mean, he treated us like gold. In fact, midway through the season, I think he had an inkling that there was going to be a merger.
Sure.
And he signed all of us to
professional services contracts. Yeah.
So not personal services, just contracts.
Oh, okay.
So he signed me to a 4-year, I think it was like $200,000 a year deal.
Smart man.
And when the merger went through, the NHL were supposed to honor all existing contracts.
Right.
Well, they didn't honor ours.
Right.
So Bill Waters, who was my agent at the time, went to court and we got a settlement of $70,000. So I mean, it wasn't chump change, that's for sure.
No, and that's just because the owner was looking out for you. I mean, it's funny you explained that, him coming down and being like a Hugh Hefner. It's like the WHA was the WWF. Like the personalities among the owners. You got Scalbanian, you got Pocklington, you've got sorry, what was his name? Bassett. It just seems like there was a lot of flash and money and a little bit more showmanship in the WHA. Maybe at a time when the NHL didn't have that. So it's exciting to hear that it kind of makes sense why it fizzled out a little bit. They couldn't maintain the contracts that they were signing these young players with.
Bassett was, I believe, was president or owner of CTV at the time. I think wasn't a big media guy.
I believe he was.
And then his daughter was Carling Bassett, who ended up playing professional tennis.
Yeah. And then it's funny because we had Mike Pellick on our podcast, and he was talking about when he went to the WHA, and he's talked about when the guys got their checks, first thing Monday morning, they'd be at the bank to cash them because they didn't know if they were going to go through or not.
Oh, wow.
This is some of the teams. There was a lot of teams that were in trouble in the WHA that the players didn't get paid for several weeks, sometimes at a time. That went on in the WHA with some of the teams.
Dennis Marouk was on telling a similar story to that, not knowing where the payment was going to come from or if it was going to come for the number of seasons that I think it was with the Barons at that time.
Cleveland, yeah. Well, my brother-in-law was there with them.
There you go.
Bob Stewart. He was a captain, and he was with him in California. And then he played in St. Louis, Pittsburgh. And it's funny, I played against him my first year in the NHL. I played against my future brother-in-law. I wasn't married at the time. And got engaged that Christmas. But we were playing against Pittsburgh, and I'm in front of the net, and he's cross-checking me, and I'm whacking him. Next thing you know, we're on the ice and grabbing onto each other, and then kind of looked at each other and let go, and then just went away. We said, no, we can't do this.
Hey, you know what? You can, because I've seen brothers go at it.
I was going to say, it sounds like a usual Thanksgiving dinner in the United States. If I'm being honest, I've heard it more or less tame than that. Tell me the main difference, if you can, about playing in the WHA versus the NHL, because I noticed one specific difference in your stats that year. In terms of goals per game, assists per game, relatively similar from one year to the next. The major difference: 60 more penalty minutes in the WHA versus the NHL. Grittier league, different league? Did they call it different?
Well, what happened to us was the year before we came there, Birmingham had all the tough guys. Mm-hmm. They had about 6 of them. And they beat the shit out of everybody in the league. So all of a sudden, us 6 underage guys come in, and all our tough guys are gone. The only guy we had left was Dave Hansen. Everybody went elsewhere. So it was payback time. And you know what? But that was the way I played anyway. That was my personality, that I'm not going to let anybody intimidate me.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm not going anywhere. do whatever you want. I'll fight you.
Sure.
I don't care. I mean, if you hit my helmet and break your hand, then, you know, you're going to stop wanting to fight me sooner or later. You know, so that was just my personality as a player. I just wasn't going to let anybody intimidate me or try to intimidate me. And because of what happened the previous year, teams were gunning for us. So, I mean, that just was what happened.
Just part
in
and
that
parcel to playing, standing up for the team. Now, 1979, an interesting year for the draft, obviously because of the merger. Often considered one of the best draft years of all time. And you were fifth overall.
Yep.
Given the overall state of things, the number of new players coming into the league, the players who had to be redrafted if their services weren't retained, exceptions being like Wayne Gretzky, Gordie Howe, did you expect to go higher, lower than 5? Was that a surprise to you?
No, because I thought I was going to go 4th because the only team that I talked to was the Washington Capitals.
Oh,
and so I figured, okay, they're gonna take me, right? And now they ended up taking a guy who wasn't too shabby, and Mike Gardner. So I can't say they made a mistake, that's for sure. So then I end up going, but then you think about it, I went after him 5th to Vancouver, but then like Ray Bourque was after me,
right.
Hartsburg was after
Messier.
Messier. There was a lot of guys that were drafted after I was,
right.
that were unbelievable hockey players. That draft was real. I mean, 3 rounds were solid.
Yeah.
You know,
you couldn't go wrong with the top 10. That's for sure.
No.
Was there anybody in that top 10 that
Perry Turnbull was about the only guy that went to St. Louis. I think he was 2nd or 3rd. Mike Foligno was 2nd or 3rd in Detroit. And the other guy went to St. Louis, and he didn't really have that great of a career.
Yeah, I don't even remember that name. Sorry if you're listening.
I mean, he was a decent player.
Yeah, no,
big guy that, you know, played a physical game.
Yeah,
but he just didn't put up the numbers like the rest of the guys in that round did.
Yeah,
and to be fair, Dad, he probably doesn't remember your name either. So no harm, no foul.
If he's listening, he might.
Yeah.
So I think I'm safe.
Now you're safe. Yeah, exactly. And if not, we've got someone to protect us and Rick over here, so we're pretty good. You had at least half a season in Vancouver to play, and were traded halfway through the season. What was the story behind that? I actually don't know. You to Toronto you came. What was the reason for that?
Well, it kind of started in training camp. Harry Neal was our coach. I can't remember the gentleman's name that was our GM at the time, but he was sick, ended up in the hospital. So Harry kind of took over a dual role. But it was right at camp. We did a 5-mile run, and he kept saying I was out of shape and that he beat me in the 5-mile run and all this stuff. And I don't even think Harry could walk 5 miles, like, you know, let alone run 5 miles.
It's a real insult.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, there's no way he beat me. And anyway, it just kind of went downhill from there. And then eventually I found myself in the press box, and, you know, I didn't know what was going to happen. Being traded was the furthest thing from my mind.
Yeah.
You know, when you're the 5th overall pick.
Of course.
And then all of a sudden, boom, it happened. And it was a funny story how it happened too. Because when we went to Vancouver, there was no apartments available in the city at all. Like, we could not find an apartment.
Really?
So, I'm getting old, I guess. I'm forgetting names.
You got a lot of names in that head. So,
but anyway, a young guy that was with us, and so we decided we were going to get an apartment. Now, the one we got was in the building that was being built that was next door to Harry Neal's building.
Sure.
So I lived with Glenn Hanlon in Burnaby at his house for the time. So February comes and our apartment's ready. So we go into our apartment, we get set up, we have a little party.
As you do.
To kind of christen the apartment.
Of course.
And it was after a 14-day road trip. We came back, got into the apartment, had a little party. So anyway, the next morning at like 6:30 in the morning, my phone starts ringing by the bed. And of course, I had a little bit to drink the night before. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? Like, our phones aren't hooked up yet. But if you buzz at the door,
it comes
your
up.
phone rings,
Right.
and then you have to hit a button on
To
the
get
phone
let
to
into
open the door.
Yeah.
So phone rings. It says, Rick, it's Harry Neal. You want to let me in? I go, yeah.
No fucking way.
I thought it was one of the guys screwing around with me, right? So anyway, phone rings again. I pick it up. He said, Rick, it's Harry. Can you let me in? And I realized I recognized his voice. I said, holy shit, it is Harry. So I pressed the button, which I thought was the right button. Obviously, I pressed the wrong one.
Oh, no.
And I get my roommate up. And I said, Harry's coming up. We got to get, so we're throwing beer bottles and liquor bottles into the cupboards and closing the cupboard. We're just doing whatever we can to hide everything.
Yeah.
The phone rings again. It's Harry. He says, Rick, never mind. Just come down to the front door. I go, this is weird. So I walk down and I let him in, and he stands there and he tells me, he says, we just traded you to Toronto. And I wanted you to know because of our time difference before the press finds out there. Right. And that's why it was 6:30 in the morning. And I said, oh, really? And I said, well, what's the trade? He said, well, we traded you and Builder Lego, who was the 4th overall pick the year prior to me.
Sure.
To Toronto. And I said, for who? And he said, for Tiger Williams and Jerry Butler. And I kind of laughed. I don't know. I mean, I was hungover, and I thought it was funny. I didn't think, I knew Tiger would be a guy that they would use and would love in Vancouver, but Jerry Butler was I think he only played the rest of that year and he was done. Right. So I just kind of laughed and chuckled, and he looked at me, and I just said, oh, sorry. Harry, I said, I didn't mean to laugh or anything. Anyway, so he just opened the door and walked out and left. And
wow.
Billy called me and he said, Squid, he said, we're going to go down to I don't think he called me Squid because it wasn't Squid at that point.
Right, not that time, yeah.
And he said, so we had to go to the rink at 10 o'clock, get our equipment. We had a 1 o'clock flight to Toronto.
Wow.
With a sore head.
Oh, yeah. So he said, okay, I'll meet you at the rink, and my wife will drive us to the airport. I said, okay, no problem. So we get on the plane, and Billy goes, let's have a couple of beer. I said, I don't know. Do you think we should, Billy? I mean, we're landing in Toronto. There's probably going to be some press. He says, we'll have a few. And so anyway, then all of a sudden the captain comes on. He says, welcome to Air Canada, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, because today's election day, there will be no alcohol served on this flight.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know
Well,
that.
even though we were getting in after the election was already going to be over.
So you couldn't have done anything about it anyway, yeah.
But they still wouldn't serve. And the bars and everything closed on election day too.
Wow.
Yeah, back in the day.
I didn't realize
back in those days. So, because they didn't want anybody to be influenced by alcohol, right? So Billy, I'm not kidding. He at one point offered the flight attendant $1,000 to serve us a beer. I said, Billy, come on. We don't need a beer that bad.
Apparently he did, yeah.
Well, apparently he did. I didn't. I had already had quite a few the night before.
Sure.
So anyway, we landed in Toronto, and sure enough, there's every TV station, radio station, newspaper waiting for us. And we walk out, and I look at Billy, and I go, glad we didn't have a few beers now? He goes, yeah, actually I am.
Oh, wow.
But once we got to the hotel, we ordered a dozen beers to the room.
A little bit of celebrating, yeah.
Not to say your game was the next day, though. So I think...
Yeah, it was.
Was
it? in Long Island.
Those were the days. And I remember hanging out with some of the players back in the day, and I forget where it was. It was after a loss in the playoffs to Montreal. It was a different team. But anyways, because Tiger was there, and we went to, remember Turnbull owned a bar around the corner, that wine place?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got invited back, and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, this beer bottle just misses me. It was Tiger. He was pissed because I think he got the penalty that they scored on or whatever it was. Anyways, the bottle flings over and just misses me. And he wasn't trying to hit anybody. He was just like drunk and throwing it up there. But that was the end of the season, so they were safe doing
Oh,
that.
wow.
But those are the kind of
The days where you could get away with.
Those are old school hockey. That was good.
Yeah, and we only had 6 each, and then we flew to Long Island the next day and played against the Islanders in our first game. And I wore number 20 because, they just gave me number 20. And then when we got back to Toronto, we had a couple more games on the road, and I asked for 22. Because that's what I wore in junior and in Birmingham, and I wanted 22. That was the number I loved.
Do you have a story behind?
Well,
why?
wait. Before I just realized how apropos it is having them on today.
That's right.
2022.
February 2nd, 2022, or February 22nd, 2022.
This is all about the twos today.
The day we're recording, at least. It'll come out a little bit after. But do you have a story behind why number 22?
Well, I just watched professionals in football and other sports, and I just found that a lot of the best players wore 22. But I also liked the way that the number fit and covered the whole back of the sweater.
Yeah.
I didn't like single-digit numbers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Anything double-digit to me was better than a single one because it covered the whole back of the sweater.
It's a bit more full.
Yeah,
substantial.
It was just, and 22 was my favorite. And so I had it in midget. I had it in Tier 2 junior, 2 years of junior in Sherbrooke, Birmingham. Couldn't get it in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. I get to Toronto. I could get it there because that's what Tiger wore.
Right.
And then I get traded to Chicago. And what's his name? The defenseman. Gosh. I don't know what's going on with him.
Pierre Palat?
No, the guy that was in Toronto.
No, that's
and he signed with Chicago. Gary Nyland.
Oh, yeah.
But Gary Nyland was wearing 22. He was like 6 years or 7 years younger than I was. And he wouldn't give it to me.
Oh, no.
You know,
that seems like a no-no.
Well, I guess I didn't offer him anything. So he said,
I guess this day and age, guys will offer a car or something. Like the big guys that make the big money, they'll offer huge money for you to give up your number. Well, some guys will just do it, and other guys will say, "No, what are you giving me?"
No, exactly. And so the funny thing is, I said, okay, I'll wear 44.
Sure.
You know, it was double 22. So Pulford, who's our general manager, he goes, I don't want you wearing that number. And I said, why? He said, well, you know, as we made a big trade, we don't want to bring any more attention to you than that's necessary. And I said, Pulley, it's a number. Like it's on the back of my sweater. I don't even see it. I don't care. I said, it's not going to change the way I play. Right. You know.
Right.
But he wouldn't let me wear it.
He's an old school guy. Was there anybody wearing those kind of numbers back then?
No, not very many.
Just Wayne.
Just Wayne, yeah, pretty much.
Oh,
but it was always 0. It was always 1 to 31, basically, maybe 33. But
as
I
in
don't
the
think
number of
players. Then they opened it up to under 100 years later, but you never saw a number under over 31.
I'm waiting to get that first player who wears the number 100. That's exciting to me. I
gotta say. That'll do it. There's not enough room. They got to leave room for future advertising, which they'll do sooner or later.
I actually, obviously never played professionally, but 22 has always been my number as well. You were 22 years old as well when you got the captaincy in Toronto. Is that right?
Yep.
22 years old, so that's convenient as well. A little bit of kismet there.
I was 22 years old when I scored the 50 goals the first year.
The first player ever in a Toronto uniform to get 50
I was
50 goals in a
22
season.
years old at the time, and it was 1982. So there's a lot of twos.
You know, but you'll find that that's so true, and Sidney talks about this too. How many times 87 comes up in his life?
Mm-hmm. And Daryl Sittler as well.
Same thing. Yeah.
Why does he wear 87?
Who?
Sydney.
Yeah.
He was born August 7th, 87.
87. Kind of a good idea.
87. I'm 5'6". I never realized that till I saw Sydney's number. So whenever I, at that point in my life, I started switching to 56.
Now I want to talk briefly about the 4 years you'd spent as captain in Toronto. Obviously marred a little bit by the way that things came to an end a little bit. And it seems like the captaincy in Toronto, among all sports, is seen as this coveted position. You know, it's legendary, the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And yet there are multiple occasions on which the captains have been rather ingloriously sent out of town. You mentioned Dave Keon, Daryl Sittler, Doug Gilmour's trade as well, your situation. Do you think this is, because you've worked for a few different organizations, is this, or was it at the time, a management issue in Toronto, or is it just an issue on a grander scale in the NHL, but because of the media attention in Toronto, we pay more attention to the times it happens here?
Well, from my experience, I can tell you right now that Harold Ballard, first of all, that he was a problem.
Right.
And he wouldn't pay money to hire a good general manager or a good coach.
Right.
So we didn't have that
Yeah.
in Toronto the whole time I was there. But I will say that was pretty much almost the same in all the other organizations.
Right.
They weren't that much different. Okay. Some of the owners were a little bit nicer, a little bit better to the players. But back then it was the owners controlled the league. They controlled Al Eagleson.
Sure.
And that's why we had no power whatsoever.
Right.
I'm really, really thankful that finally, after all these years and lockouts and whatever, that the players have power now.
Yeah.
And I really think that's great. Finally.
It really feels like you were someone far ahead of their time trying to stand up for the player's voice, and often because the owners controlled so much in the media, it would just get turned the other way and you would be vilified and you had no voice there. You mentioned Al Eagleson, and we know, the amount of control that he had and some of the,
well, he was
the
my
issues
first
around him.
agent too, by the way.
So this is my next question here,
So
because
you still have money?
in 92, when you were contemplating retirement or potentially had retired, you mentioned that there was the expansion and Ottawa would have been a great team. You were born in Ottawa, a great team for you to potentially play for, but you didn't have an agent at the time. And you've said that you thought that may have hurt you in terms of, reaching out to the teams and potentially finding a new role. What was the reason for not having an agent at this point? You had one in Eagleson. What happened?
Well, I had Al Eagleson, and then Bill Waters was the only guy I ever really talked to, because it's a funny story. Go back to Vancouver.
Right.
So Al goes around to every team before the season and talks about, the Players Association and all that. And then after that, he would take his clients on that team out to a dinner in a fancy place with a private room. And
Right.
so we go to this restaurant. We're in this private room, and I'm just standing there and talking. And one of his employees comes up and says, "What's your name?" I kind of look at him. I said, "It's Rick Vaive." Why? He goes, "Oh, I was just wondering." But then I see him walk right over to Eagleson and whisper something to him. So obviously, Al didn't even know my goddamn name.
Oh, wow.
And I was a 5th pick overall.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So anyway, the only guy I dealt with was Bill Waters.
Right.
And then Bill left Eagleson when I came to Toronto shortly after. So I moved to Bill. So anyway, Bill became the assistant GM in Toronto, so he couldn't represent players.
Sure.
I just thought, you know what? I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
I think I can handle this on my own. I made probably a dozen calls to Esposito in Tampa and Bridgman in Ottawa.
Right.
Never got a reply back. So Dale Howardchuk, who was my roommate in Buffalo and my neighbor, he lived like 3 houses down from me. I said to him one day, I said, "You're good friends with Ferguson."
Yeah.
John Ferguson. And he goes, yeah, we're really good friends. And I said, because he was a player personnel guy for Ottawa. I said, is there any way you can get a hold of him and have him give me a call? I said, sure. So Fergie called me and I said, I'd like to play in Ottawa. I said, I believe I can still score 20 plus goals.
Right.
And I'm from Ottawa. I said, it gives you guys a named player.
Early 30s at the time, I think you would have
I
been?
was like 31, I think, or 32.
Yeah. So still plenty of time left, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought this is a good fit. It gives you guys some instant credibility. And he said, "Oh," and I said, "Look, I'll pay for the minimum salary." Which at the time was 120.
Right.
And I said, "But we can build some bonuses in,
Sure.
and then if I hit certain numbers, a contract larger will kick in for the next year,
Sure.
whatever.
Sure.
We'll do something." He said, "You'd play for that?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I want to keep playing." And he said, that's great. He said, I'll get a hold of Mel. So he called Mel, and Mel wouldn't sign me.
Wow. Any reasoning behind that, or?
I don't know. He never gave me a reason. Mel never told him a reason why. And then they got a guy from Chicago, one of their tougher guys, and they paid him $300,000. And so anyway,
could have had you for the league minimum.
It was unfortunate, but for me, I ended up playing in Hamilton. I broke my wrist at training camp, missed 14 weeks. Didn't play a whole lot. I was a player assistant coach. It was Vancouver's farm team.
Right.
And then the next year I got a head coaching job in Charleston, South Carolina in the ECHL. So it all worked out pretty good. But I wish I could have played 2, 3, 4 more years.
Sure. It wasn't out of your system yet.
I wasn't done with the game yet.
Yeah.
I wasn't done playing. And I was only 59 goals away from 500.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. A couple more seasons, and that's...
I thought maybe 2 more seasons or 3, I'll get to 500, which, everybody...
It's a nice milestone.
It's a big deal.
Sure.
Absolutely. And but it never happened. And you know what?
I just want to touch on a great project that we were involved in together with Bob Lavelle, which is one of the best-selling pieces that we've ever had, which was Captain's Row.
Oh, right.
Bob said that. But this was a great project, and the piece, you'll see it around, Bob had organized all the Leafs, including Dave Keon, who was not one to do anything related to the Leafs, but because I guess he was close friends with Bob, and Bob was with Bell, so he made sure everybody got phones and everything during the time period when cell phones just came out. But he organized it all the way back from Ted Kennedy to, who was most current? I think Sundin.
Sundin would have been at the time,
And there was, 11 captains in there?
I see it every day, and when I'm sitting in my... by my computer.
Oh, you still got one?
It's right here on the wall to my right. So
So Bob came to me and he said, I got this project and I think it could be a big seller.
Right.
And I said, you can't get all those guys. And he said, yeah, I can. And I said, Dave Keon too? And he said, yeah. Doug Gilmore and all the guys were in it, from Kennedy that were still alive, and Rob Ramage, and all those guys came in from out of town. And we had set up, he had set up a photo studio with a professional photographer, but he had the Hockey Hall of Fame donate all the original equipment from each player.
Right.
And it was all the backdrop. So it looked like the Leaf dressing room, that he set it up like that, but all the equipment was there, including the old sticks and everything from Ted Kennedy. And what a great day that was for me as a hockey fan, and growing up in more of the era back then than the current era.
Right.
To sit with all those guys for the day. I even got pictures of the group together. And, Ted's passed now, and even George Armstrong. George Armstrong is alive, but he rarely signed anything.
Right.
And Dave Keon, same thing. And we had a big dinner celebrating it, and all these people came.
That was a massive event.
It was great. If you get your hands on one, I've got a couple tucked away for myself, and all the players got them.
They really just aren't.
We got some, and so I gave each of my boys one, and I've got one in my place. I don't know who else I gave them to. Obviously, close friends and people that, were a big part of my life, obviously, throughout the years. But I remember that because it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And we had that big dinner at the place at
the exhibition.
That was, we organized that. And Dennis Hull was one of the guest speakers, and we all took every
Ron McLean
table
as well.
Ron McLean, everybody. We had the big dais with all the players at the front, and everybody got. I think you were even there.
I was there, yeah.
So each table got to go one by one and stand behind the players. We had floor to ceiling banners of each of the players, and I still got that picture. And we all got to stand behind a player, and everybody got that photo framed before they left the event, along with a jersey that was on the back of every chair, signed by one of the 10 captains.
Yeah,
it was quite a deal.
It was massive.
Something I'm very proud of.
You know what the funny thing about that night was? I don't even know how it happened, but my wife ended up bringing home one with the people in it. I don't know where the hell she got it. Somebody just gave it to her.
One of the photos of other people lined up with.
Yeah, and now we were in it as well, but it was funny because it was wrapped, right? So you couldn't see what it was.
Right.
She just assumed they were giving her one of the.
So somebody sitting without their photo. Here's another funny story, kind of unrelated.
So if anybody out there is missing it, I have it.
So here's one quick story, semi-related, but Dennis Hall was the guest speaker, and he is hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we had our staff table, and we had, bless her soul, she's passed now, but Lily, who was sitting at the table with Dennis Hall because he was the MC. And it was a round table. And on every table, we had a camera, Kodak camera, those disposable things back in the day when you didn't have digitals. And so that was for somebody to take pictures of everybody at the table and your celebrity. And, you know, we had, I think, one for everybody. Anyways, Dennis gets up to do the talking. And he starts going, he says, okay, before we start, I've got an auction item. And everybody's, what are you talking about? He holds up this little camera and he says, see that beautiful woman down there? He says, that's her. She's Lily and she works for Frameworth. Now I had this camera and I've been taking pictures under the table and I'm selling this camera for starting bid $500. It was the place just cracked up. And Lily was such a good spirited person. And so she took it with the grain, and we just had such a great time with it. Dennis is hilarious.
Yeah, Dennis.
Well, the funny thing about Dennis, I mean, I've been to so many things where he got up and spoke.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how many times you heard the same joke.
Sure.
You still laughed your ass off because he would laugh and he would make you laugh.
Oh,
right.
His laugh alone. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was like, he could have been a comedian.
He is a comedian. You know,
he is, yeah.
The other great line he had was another function I was at, and he's looking out in the crowd. It was an alumni tournament, and he looks out and he sees Brad Park. He says, I see Brad Park out there. He says, I remember Brad Park when he could stick handle in a phone booth. He says, now he can't fit in one. Like, he just had the greatest one-liners, and they stick in your head. So anyways, that was Dennis. But
he was funny.
Well, I mean, now that we're on the topic of memorabilia, obviously it's a podcast that focuses quite a bit on that, you know, and you as well, Rick, doing the podcast with Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs fan. You mentioned that you have the Captain's Row piece in your place. Is collecting, is that something that you do? Do you have any pieces that mean a lot to you?
Not really. I'm not, you know what, it's funny because I sat my boys down, I guess they were almost 20. They were in that range, late teens. I said, guys, I said, like, I got all this stuff here, but I got one of everything.
Right.
Like I got one silver medal, one bronze medal.
Sure.
I got one of this, one of that. I said, what do you guys want? And he said, we don't want any of it. And I'm going, really?
Wow.
You don't want any of my stuff?
Are you looking for another son? Because I've got a need for some of that.
And they're going like, no. So anyway, I ended up putting everything in an auction.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
And I got 33,000 US out of it. So I put half in each of their accounts so that they would, you know.
So they actually did want it, but they wanted the cash part.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out they got the cash.
Yeah.
But I think they were just confused. They didn't realize, you know, I mean.
What it meant.
What it meant and everything else. And but over the years, I've gotten some things that I've given to them, and like the your captain's role.
Yeah. Did you? What about the 50 goal puck? Did you keep that?
No, that was put in the Hall of Fame. It's funny because back then, Lefty Reed, who was a curator of the Hockey Hall of Fame, just walk in the room and say, "Oh, sorry, I do have the puck."
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
The Leafs used to frame. We used to frame for the Leafs, and they gave it to you. I remember framing it.
Yeah. But the sticks, they would come in and say, "We want to put your stick in the Hall of Fame." Okay.
There you go.
You know,
never asked you. They just do it.
No, they say, we'd like to put your stick in the Hall of Fame.
Is it still yours?
What are you going to say? No, I mean, I want my stick in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the second one, then the third one. Then all of a sudden, years go by. I never see it in the Hall of Fame, or nobody ever seen it in there. And I try to get them all back. And I finally got the original one back, the first one, through a lot of hard work and red tape. Had to sign piece of paper saying that I wouldn't want the other two back. And anyway,
Wow.
it's a crazy thing, but that's the way it was back then.
But it seems like so much of your career, there has been this red tape, and you've been vocal about the ways in which you've had some conflicts with some of the people you've been working with. Ballard is one of them. There's some information you put out about, working with Don Cherry and some of the difficulties you had there, Muckler in Buffalo as well. And then you tell these stories about putting an offer on a table that's too good to refuse in Ottawa. And part of me starts to wonder, was there a communication going around in the background among owners about, hey, listen, he was bad to me, do me a solid and don't do him a favor, at a time, especially as I said, where they kind of controlled the narrative? Do you feel like that got in the way and potentially still echoes now to, not being in the Hall of Fame, potentially having your number retired? Are there elements there that you think maybe you're being shunned a little bit, or is that just kind of background noise to you?
I'd like to think there isn't. But I can tell you one thing, that I didn't get along well with Don Cherry, who was my boss in Mississauga when I was coaching the
Ice Dogs.
We had a couple of run-ins, or more than a couple. I sent out probably 25 resumes every year for jobs in the American League, ECHL, OHL, you name it.
Because you had success in South Carolina.
I never had another interview.
Really?
I don't know, and I can't say if he had anything to do with that or not.
Too coincidental?
It's too coincidental that, between ECHL and the American League, I had a winning percentage of 600.
Pretty good.
So you have one bad year, and then all of a sudden you can't even get an interview?
Exactly.
Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
To me, that was too coincidental. But as far as the other stuff, I don't think that that's the case. It's funny. Maybe I've said more than I should have at times, but the funny thing too is I keeps coming up. I keep seeing it sometimes where people are saying that I left the Leafs on bad terms. I'm thinking, well, I don't see it that way.
Right.
I lost the captaincy. I owned it. I made a mistake.
Right.
I thought it was probably worse than what it should have been.
Sure.
Or, it shouldn't have been that drastic.
A missed practice for those who don't know, in morning practice. Yeah.
And 7 a.m. practice. Yeah. But you know what? It's at the end of the day, I never had a bad relationship.
Right.
In Toronto. I kept playing the same way. I scored 30 plus goals every year after that. I never had a problem with the coaches that I had in Toronto. Never really had a problem with Harold either, or Jerry McNamara, who was the general manager.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, boom, I get traded. I didn't ask for a trade.
Right.
And it was 3 days before training camp in Chicago. And all of a sudden, I keep seeing once in a while that I left on bad terms. I don't know where that came from.
Well, it's in 2020 you decided to write your book Catch 22, and in that process, I'm assuming maybe there was a little bit of a book tour. It was a tough time with COVID and all that, but you got to at least share your side of the story and reclaim the narrative that, as you're saying, may have been kind of taken away from you. Was that part of why you did it? Was to make sure that your story was out there to bear and that there was no confusion as to what was going on?
Well, that was part of it, but that wasn't the real part of it. The real part of it was I wanted people to know about my life. How I grew up, where I grew up, what it was like, what eventually, I lived with growing up got to me, and that I had to overcome that. So there was a lot of things in my life that I just wanted people to know.
Yeah.
That happened in my life and what it was like. And because I think, I always think that there's so many fans out there that think, oh, you played in the NHL for 13 years,
Right.
you played in the WHA. Life must have been great for you.
Right.
Well, not everybody's life is great,
No, of course.
and I don't think people understand that. That's why I love watching documentaries like on Netflix and stuff, because it tells the story about these people,
Sure.
when they were young.
Yeah.
And I love that, like I watched one last night, as a matter of fact, on a reservation in Arizona where the kids, all they wanted, the basketball was a big thing at the high school. They had
I've heard about this one. Yeah.
yeah. And it was it was the biggest residential place in the U.S.
Right.
But I mean, they had a 6,000 seat stadium for
Right.
their high school basketball team.
Right.
It was crazy.
Right.
But what these kids went through growing up in high school and stuff, not only playing basketball and getting an education, but the things they had to do otherwise.
Right.
Like, some of them had no running water and stuff
Right.
like that. I mean, it was really incredible to see that because, like I said, everybody thinks that if you play in one of the top professional leagues in sports,
It's all good.
your life was always great.
Right.
Well, that's not the case, people.
And I think it's about time that we start to humanize the athletes a little bit more. It's gone way too far the other way, where we think that you get an insight into, especially like the modern day hockey player, half of what we say about them happens off the ice. And it's time to realize that these are human beings that we're talking about. You've had your struggles as well, as you had mentioned with alcoholism. You went to rehabilitation as well, and you'd mentioned that during some of your darkest periods, the jobs stopped coming.
Yep.
You stopped getting calls. People pulled away at a time when you realistically needed the most help, and that sent you, as you said, kind of deeper into a spiral. That doesn't happen if we view our athletes as human beings. And I think that part of what your book does so well is to share that story and to let everyone know it's not all good all the time, and we need to address that in the people that we watch.
Yeah, and I mean, even today, the guys make great money, and I'm happy for them. I mean, there's a lot of guys my age and older that are really bitter at what the players make today.
Sure.
I mean, you'd be shocked.
Right.
And I had one guy say to me one time, who shall remain nameless, said, how in the hell can they pay that Connor McDavid $12.5 million?
Right.
And I said, let me tell you this. Probably 2/3, maybe even more of the teams in the NHL on any given night have 6,000 to 8,000 empty seats.
Right.
Except when Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby
Right.
or Matthews or Ovechkin go and play there.
Right.
They sell every one of those tickets.
Right.
That's a lot of revenue.
Absolutely.
How many of his sweaters have they sold over
crazy.
the years? Yeah. I mean, it's,
he earns every penny of that.
Absolutely.
Or in fairness, okay, so what happens is they make that kind of money, but it's hard to justify those but they earn it. They earn it for the league. They earn it all the way around, every penny of it, more so than maybe a guy that's making $1 million that doesn't sell a sweater,
Right.
doesn't fill the stadium. So you're absolutely right there.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And now I think we're kind of running towards the end of the promised 45 minutes to an hour or so. But Rick, I could do this all day. Tons of great stories and tons of great insight as well.
It was a great interview. I want to do this again. One thing I just wanted to ask, Rick. So you mentioned Spud, PEI, but you're born in Ottawa. Did you live in PEI?
Yeah, my mother's from PEI.
Oh, okay.
My mother's from Charlottetown. My dad's from Gatineau.
Okay.
So he worked for Dominion something. He worked on steel up in buildings and bridges and all that. And he had an accident. They were bringing a beam across with a crane, hit him in the side of the head, knocked him out. He fell through his safety belt. He fell 40 feet.
Oh, jeez.
And he was in the hospital for probably a year and a half. And I don't know how many surgeries he had. But he couldn't work on steel anymore.
Right.
And so started working for a company that made altimeters and different, those dials and all that for aircraft. So they were opening a plant in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and they knew my mother was from PEI. They asked him if he'd like to go and kind of get it going and run the factory. He said, sure. So we moved to Amherst, Nova Scotia. 2 years later, they closed the plant down. He had no education, neither did my mother. So what do? We go to PEI. We lived with my grandmother for a little while, my grandfather, and he started his own painting company. And it was really successful for quite a few years because all the houses in PEI were wood shingles back then. You know, people don't understand that, don't realize that all the houses back in PEI in those days, there was no siding, there was no brick. It was all wood shingles.
Pretty intense climate to do that as well with you.
Yeah. So a lot of painting was needed. Every couple of years you had to repaint your house. Then all of a sudden they built the bridge and siding became so affordable.
Right.
And then brick became affordable and the business went down the tubes. And,
the reason I wanted to clarify that, because we have some very special listeners in PEI that listen every week. And there's a very special little girl out there named Sarah. Mm-hmm. And I'd love it if you could just give her a shout out to Sarah, who listens every week and she gets all excited. Could you just say hi to Sarah for us?
Absolutely. Sarah, it's Rick Vaive. And yes, I lived in PEI from the time I was, I believe, 10 and a half until I left at 17 to go play junior. And it's a wonderful place. And I'm sure you're a wonderful person because everybody in PEI is.
They all are. And this is a whole group from the town of Tignish.
Yeah, I played hockey there with Tier 2.
Wow, there you go.
I used to go up there and play Junior A, Tier 2. And it was funny because I was in school at the time, obviously. I was 15 years old or 16. And it wasn't that long. I mean, to anybody, it seems crazy, but it was a 2-hour drive. So, I mean, we'd get home at midnight, but we had to go to school the next day.
Right.
You know, and, but PEI is pretty small. So you could go from one end to the other in about 3 hours probably.
And it's all gorgeous too.
It's a special place. Beautiful. For those of you who've never been to PEI, you got to take a trip there. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Absolutely. Well, Rick, thanks so much for joining us. Squid, the $1 Million Man, Rick, at Rick522 on Twitter. Anything else you want to plug apart from your book, Catch 22, My Battles in Hockey and Life?
No, not really. I'm, you know what? I mean, the last couple of years have been extremely tough, but life's good. I've got 2 wonderful boys. I've got a grandson now. I got a granddaughter coming early April.
You're making my dad jealous.
And a great partner in Mike Wilson and their podcast.
And my wife who...
Oh, well, of course. Sorry, I cut you off before you got to the post-sport part.
And we're going to be married 41 years in June.
Wow.
Congratulations.
So, congratulations. And congratulations on a fantastic career as well, Rick. We'd love to have you back if you're ever available. So for Rick Vaive, for Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, myself, Mikey Aaronworth, this has been the Sign Off Podcast, and this is us signing off. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of yet another episode. Thanks again so much for joining us. You can find videos of all of our episodes on YouTube by searching the Sign Off Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Frameworth Sport or Instagram at Frameworth Sports. And hey, if you're not sick of me yet, you can find me on Twitter over at Retrograde Mikey, or you can always find me embarrassing myself over on Instagram at Aaronworth. The Sign Off is a proud product of Fadoo Productions and Sad Styles Productions. Executive producers, Mikey Aaronworth and Andrew Bascom. Until next week, this is Mikey Aaronworth, signing off.
Furnished by Sad Styles Productions.
Get into it.